Welcome to the first of 4 in our webinar series, NIP, Livestock Disease in the Bud, Create Your Own Contact Tracing Program. Today, addressing swine. Our plan is to have the presentation last about 35 minutes with time during and at the end for questions. I'm Carol Delaney, Livestock Specialist at the State of Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, also known as DACF, in the Animal Health Division. We're fortunate to partner with University of Maine Cooperative Extension to offer you this series, and Donna Coffin is our gracious host today on Zoom and actually Facebook, and is recording this session for future access. We hope that at the end of this presentation you'll be familiar with DACF staff and Extension animal health staff, and the web pages where you'll discover all sorts of really useful information, rules, and our services. We also hope you'll leave with the intention of improving the management of livestock disease through a system similar to COVID-19 contact tracing. Okay, let me have my colleagues at DACF who are presenting today and Dr. Ann Lichtenwallner introduce themselves. So, Carolyn?
Sure. Thanks, Carol. My name is Carolyn Hurwitz. I am an assistant state veterinarian in the Division of Animal Health. My primary programs are poultry health and cervid health, but I also very much enjoy pigs. And so I'm excited to be partnering on this presentation about swine health in Maine.
Donna Flint?
Hi, I'm Donna Flint. I am the animal disease traceability technician as well as the poultry health technician for the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry.
And Ann?
Hi, I'm Ann Lichtenwallner, and I'm a veterinarian, and I'm the director of the the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab at the University of Maine, and do work with a lot of different animal species. Our work here in Cooperative Extension is both somewhat guided by and certainly in cooperation with the work of the state. So happy to be here.
Right, so here you've met some of the Wonder Women of animal health in the state of Maine, and so Donna Coffin, could you go over kind of the housekeeping today?
Sure. If we have folks that come on or tune in, if you're on Zoom, you can enter questions. If you hit the chat, and down at the bottom of the chat screen on the right, you can type in your question and hit enter. If you're on Facebook, you can make a comment, and we'll try to find the comments on Facebook and relay those to our speakers.
Okay, I'm not sure if we were going to put up a poll. And
I'm sure that this is going to come through in the recording, and I don't believe it comes through on Facebook.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll introduce the presentation today, and we'll get started then. If anyone signs in and wants to fill out the poll, please do. So we thought that the current focus on the pandemic and the control of the coronavirus causing COVID-19 in humans was a really good parallel to what livestock farmers have been doing for years, and it would serve to re-emphasize who the players are and the steps we make to prevent, follow, and contain the disease spread that is so important in our food system. So just to briefly, for controlling this pandemic using contact tracing and transparency, I was a contact tracer for a little while, so I know what I'm talking about. But the players are 1, the federal CDC, which provides information about the disease, and 2, the state CDC and local healthcare systems. They're charged with monitoring the disease incidents, pursuing contact tracing after the infection is confirmed, and they also advise the government what to do. 3, in the control of the pandemic, the infected individuals and their contacts need to participate in isolation and quarantine. This includes staying home, providing contact information, including their address, daily communications on how they feel for about 2 weeks. So contact tracing is based on the interplay between the federal and state officials and the citizens to work together to contain the disease so that we can live a normal life and have commerce. So keep this in mind when we go through our presentation and pick out the similarities between the ways farmers participate in an animal disease traceability program. All right, Carolyn?
Great. wants to switch slides. There we go. All right, thanks, Carol, for that introduction. I'm going to take this opportunity of everybody being kind of tuned in to what's going on the human health side relative to the pandemic and contact tracing, as Carol just described, to introduce a system of contact tracing, so to speak, for animals that's actually been in place for quite a long time. And a lot of principles are the same, as Carol has already pointed out. So I'm going to jump right in here, and I want to first make sure to emphasize that this is an animal health program, and it's primarily focusing on prevention rather than treatment of infectious diseases, so contagious diseases of animals. So this program is called ADT, which stands for Animal Disease Traceability. And the purpose of this program is to use information about animal movement to limit the spread of these contagious diseases. And as Carol mentioned in her discussion on the human health side about partnerships between the federal government and state government, we have the same thing mirrored here in this USDA ADT program. So USDA stands for United States Department of Agriculture, and they manage this ADT program, but it's actually implemented through the states. So the people on this webinar today are going to be your contacts if you need to reach out to us for help in participating in this ADT program. So an official federal rule was passed in 2013, which required identification and documentation of all animals moved across state lines. So those two items are the information that is used in order to help limit the spread of contagious diseases. So that's kind of the what feeds into the contact tracing ability of this ADT program to preserve animal health. You can access the USDA website, which is noted here on this slide. It will look like this. This is where you would land if you clicked on that link. You could also successfully navigate here by simply Googling USDA ADT. And on this website, you will find up-to-date information about this federal program. You can also find species-specific information about how to participate in ADT. So you can navigate to the swine pages for information about how to participate in interstate movement of swine in a way that's compliant with this ADT program. The other resource I want to point you to is the Maine Department of Agriculture Animal Health website. It will look like this. And you can navigate to the Animal Disease Traceability Program. And on this page, you will find contact information for all of us here in the Division of Animal Health. You will also find some links for USDA program information. You can see that over on the right side of this page. But most importantly, I want to draw your attention to this link here where it says Maine Premises Identification Number. This is probably the most common reason that people will navigate to this website if they're looking to participate in ADT. They'll follow that link to request a premises identification number for their farm. So at this point, you may be asking, what is a premises identification number? And so we're just taking this opportunity to introduce this vocabulary, but Donna Flint is going to give us more information about the premises identification number a little bit later in the presentation. So this is often sometimes called a PIN or a PEM-ID for short. And what this is a unique number associated with the physical location where your livestock live. So in this case, where your pigs live. It's quick and easy to assign a PREM-ID to your farm. And you're going to need that PREM-ID in order to acquire the 840 type of official identification for your pigs. And again, Donna's going to go through all those details a little bit later, but at this point, if you can just store away that a premises identification is something that you may need, and that you can get that from the website here, the Maine Department of Ag Animal Health Division website. Remember in that first slide, I told you that we need information in order to limit the spread of contagious disease. And the information that we use is animal ID and movement documentation. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. So this first component, unique individual animal identification, has species-specific requirements in order to be considered an official identification, to be accepted. So on the right here for swine, I have 3 pictures of the types of ID tags that are most commonly used as official ID for swine in our area. The first type of tag is just a metal clip tag. That's called a noose tag, N-U-E-S. The second type of tag is a visual only panel type of tag. You can see the numbers on that so you can read that. The last type of tag is actually visual and electronic. So you can read the number on that tag, but you can also scan it and pick up that number with an electronic reader. So it has that dual functionality. The second component of the ADT program, or Animal Disease Traceability, are movement records. These movement records are important because anytime you move an animal, that represents a potential opportunity for exposure of that animal to infectious or contagious disease. So this is really the contact tracing component of animal disease traceability. And for animals, what we commonly use is a document called a Certificate of Veterinary Inspection, or CVI, in order to document those animal movements. A lot of people also call this a health certificate. So here on the right, you'll see an example of the CVI, or health certificate. And on this piece of paper, or on this form, the individual animals are listed by their official ID number, and their origin is recorded and their destination is recorded. So that allows us to trace where an animal has moved. And importantly, it also allows us to trace where an animal has not moved to. So if an animal has not been to a location where there's a confirmed infectious disease, then it's reasonable for us to assume that that animal has not been exposed and should continue to stay healthy. So both ID tags and animal movement forms are now available electronically. And the Animal Disease Traceability Program is generally moving in this direction of generating and sharing electronic information. And there's a couple different programs that already generate, store, and transmit these movement documents. Those are shown here on the left. And there's also several different options available as far as readers to scan these electronic tags. This is helpful because electronic documentation of this information is going to help support accurate collection of information and then rapid sharing of that information. And those two things help support a quick response to an animal disease event in order to prevent that disease from spreading. So remember that the USDA Animal Disease Traceability Program is a federal program. So on a national level, that program is most concerned with preventing either the introduction or spread of contagious diseases of high consequence. So on the left, there's a couple examples of what those diseases may be. You've probably all heard of foot and mouth disease. These diseases are extremely important because if they're introduced into the United States or when they spread around the United States, they can severely limit the productivity of US swine and also prevents the United States from being able to export either live animals or pork products. So they have a significant negative impact on the whole United States. So that's the focus of the federal program. But regardless of whether we're talking about federal disease control or control on your own farm, the principles are still the same. So animal disease traceability is really knowing where diseased and at-risk animals are. So we see a sick, unfortunate pig here in red. We need to know where they've been and when in order to ensure that they don't have contact with a vulnerable population of animals. And so that's our response. Our response is limiting movements of these sick animals and preventing their exposure to vulnerable animals. And this is something that we're all well familiar with, as Carol has already pointed out, as we've all been living through this response to the coronavirus. So whether we're talking about a disease of people or we're talking about a disease of animal, the idea is to prevent the spread of the disease. And the way that we do this is by identifying sick individuals and exposed individuals. So we see that indicated here with a red and some orange stars. And our response is to prevent their movement into this healthy group. And so the healthy people or the healthy animals are indicated here by the green stars. So again, whether we're on a national level or a farm level, whether we're talking about pigs or we're talking about people, the concept really is the same. Now we're going to switch gears and try to show how we can use these principles of animal disease traceability by collecting information about the individual and their movements on a farm level to control disease. So we'll start first with a question for the audience. If we have a poll and if we have people that have tuned in to answer this question, we're wondering if anybody in the audience knows what PRRS stands for. I'll give you a hint. This is an abbreviation of a disease of swine. You can just guess if you want. And there's some funny options here, which should hopefully lighten the mood a little bit, since we are talking about kind of an impactful disease of swine. We've got one good guess here. Perfect. All right. So I think we can close the poll, and we've got a guess for positively rotund rambunctious swine. And while that's not the correct answer, I think that it certainly describes a situation that if you've raised swine, you probably have lived through. But I'll answer for us. PRRS actually stands for porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome. It's often just called PRRS. And PRRS has been described as the most economically significant disease to affect U.S. swine production since the eradication of classical swine fever. So it's a pretty negatively impactful disease of swine. And where there are pigs, there is PRRS. So in areas of the country where we have a lot of pigs, like Iowa, Minnesota, and the Midwest, there's a lot of PRRS. In regions like ours, where we don't have such a dense population of swine, it's actually pretty rare that we identify PRRS in our pig population. So PRRS is a virus. There are several strains of this virus, and that's one of the things that makes it a bit difficult to control. It does infect swine only, so it's not going to infect people. It'll only be making swine sick. And generally it spreads by direct contact between a vulnerable pig and a sick pig. It can also spread by contact with carrier pigs. And these carrier pigs are a pretty tricky thing with control of PRRS virus, because what a carrier pig is an animal that outwardly appears to look pretty healthy, but is actually carrying this PRRS virus and can infect other pigs. And carrier pigs, when it comes to PRRS virus, can actually harbor this virus for quite a long time. So those things make it very difficult to control or eradicate this virus once a herd has become infected. Like I've mentioned before, this virus does have a significant negative impact on pig production in all age groups. In piglets, you may see pneumonia, you may see death before weaning. In growers, you may see pneumonia and death. In breeders, you may see some or all of these signs, including abortion, stillborn piglets, piglets that are born weak and infected with the PRRS virus. You may also see pneumonia and death in this population as well. So it's clearly not a good disease to have in your herd. And the best thing that you can actually do to protect your herd from the PRRS virus is having a strong biosecurity program. So you want to prevent that disease by entering your herd in the first place. And you'll do that by asking the right questions. And the ADT program and the principles of ADT are going to help you ask the right questions. So remember from the first slide, the information that we need in order to prevent introduction or spread of contagious disease is information about the individual animal and then their movements, where they've been. So identification of live animals is going to be helpful to you on a farm level in order to gather some history, perhaps about an animal's medical record, their movement records, or their production records. So a few examples to illustrate this. In terms of medical records, we can see here is a sick pink piglet, and without an individual animal ID, once this animal gets better, we'll have no indication of this animal's health history, perhaps what diagnostics have been done, what the animal was ultimately diagnosed with and treated with. And that's information that you would want if you were considering bringing this animal into your herd. The other reason to identify live animals is so that you can keep track of movement records. So these are examples of animals that are moving either maybe through an exhibition type scenario or through a marketing type scenario. And without any individual animal ID, it would be impossible for you to record these events and know that they may have had potential exposure events in their lifetime. That'd be important information if you're thinking about adding that animal to your herd. Production records also need to be associated with an individual animal for those to be meaningful. So in this case, if you can identify an individual sow, you can keep track of her past production performance, which will give you an indication of what you may be able to expect in the future. And if you experience a deviation from that, you'll know that there are some questions that you should be asking. The other component is the certificate of veterinary inspection, or the health certificate. And that health certificate is going to be required to move an animal across state lines, but it's also good information that you can use to your advantage. So to get that CVI, you have to work with a veterinarian that's currently looking at the animal you may wish to import. So that veterinarian has to examine that animal and attest to that animal's health and the herd's health. So that would be a good person to interview and ask questions. Some questions you may want to ask are about the vaccination status of that particular herd, and get some information about the area health status. This is an example of a map that is showing the prevalence of the PRRS virus across the United States, and the size of the circle indicates the level of PRRS virus that's in circulation. So the larger the circle, the more PRRS virus there is. So you can see in the Midwest, those circles are pretty large, whereas in the southern states and up in our region, that circle is a lot smaller. So that's information that you can use about the area health status in order to help you decide if that import is a good idea for your farm, if PRRS is a virus that you're concerned about either controlling or not introducing to your farm in the first place. So that's just a brief example of how you can use the principles of animal identification and animal movement records to help make some smart decisions in order to control PRRS virus on your own farm here in Maine. Next up, Donna Flint is going to give us some information about access to the tools you can use to start implementing ADT on your own farms. Before we switch gears, if there are any questions either through Facebook or anybody on Zoom or in the chat, we can take those now. And if not, we will just scoot ahead to Donna's presentation.
I think there's a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
People ask, in terms of PRRS, will the pig always appear sick?
No, not necessarily, and that's a great question. And that actually, when I talked about a carrier animal doesn't usually appear sick, and that's why it's really important to get that information about the herd that that pig came from. If there's no PRRS in that pig's herd, then chances are that pig's not going to be carrying it. But that's a good question.
And I'll ask Anne to speak up too. It looks like she did in the chat. Question was, can it be confirmed by tests? What would you say, Anne? You have to unmute, I think.
Thanks, Laurie. Yeah, there's several different kinds of diagnostic tests. So you can do things like look for the prevalence of antibodies to it in blood tests of animals on the farm who may or may not be showing symptoms. You can also look for the virus itself in tissues from dead animals or in swabs from animals. So that's another possibility, using PCR or other viral isolation techniques. And certainly doing diagnostic necropsies when you have animals die, that's something our lab can help with. And there are other resources, of course, both regionally and statewide, to help you detect if you have animals that you've lost and you want to figure out why. It can be a good investment of your time and money.
Definitely agree.
Great. All right. Donna, you're up next.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Everybody? Anybody?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
There.
Thank you.
Oops. Now we can't hear you, Donna. Donna Flint.
I don't see any.
Yeah. Start again, Donna Flint.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Now I can, yeah.
That's weird. Anyways, hi again.
Mm-hmm.
Official identification tags for swine. What makes a tag an official is there's a U.S. shield, and in this picture here, those little metal clip tags, you can see the U.S. shield on the back side of the tag. So those metal tags are called noose tags, and they are usually put in by a veterinarian when they're putting vaccination tags in animals or any kind of health record they're doing on the farm and you don't have a tag, but they are not official. They are official, but it's hard for us to trace for certain reasons, and I can get into that later if you want. So the next ones are the Prem ID is required for these 840 tags. Now, 840 tags can be bought from various vendors, and we have a list on our website, our ADT website. But what's important on the 840 tags is every tag is a 50-digit number, and it starts with 840. That's why we call them 840 tags. And it's it just officially means that 840 means it's a U.S. animal. The Prem ID that you would get is from your state office, and that you have to use that Prem ID to order your tags. So you can get the first one on the right there is like a visual and an electronic tag combined. You can see the number from a distance. And some of those are not electronic, but it's still considered official because it has that US shield. It will also say on the plastic tags, unlawful to remove. What happens on the electronic tags is if you pull that back part out on the right side, that button tag it's called, if you pull that piece out, it breaks the chip inside that tag, and that's an alert that we know it's been tampered with. So it has to stay intact. You cannot switch tags from animal to animal. So the visual tag is a nationally unique number that is paired with one animal in one location by written records only. And the 840 electric tag, the RFID, or it's called EID sometimes, is a nationally unique number that is paired with one animal in one location that can be scanned and read. Next. So when we talk about the premise identification or Prem ID, which is much easier to say, it just basically means that the animal, location where the animal is raised, housed, or entered into commerce, as in the livestock market. So what we are going to need when you call for an information for a premise ID is we're going to need your exact address where the animal is housed. It may be your animal, but if it's not housed at your house, then we need the address where the animal is. The premise identification number is a standardized unique identifier signed by the USDA once the site is registered through your state. And in Maine, you would call it the Department of Ag at 207-287-3701. And it must be obtained to purchase official 840 type tags, no matter what type. And there are a lot of types that you can get. And at the bottom of the screen is an example of a premise ID that was assigned to my farm. So I don't live there. That's where my animals are, though. So that's it stays there at that one location. If I sell out and don't do any more animals, that number will stay there. If another person moves into that farm to start farming, that'll be theirs number as well. Next. So how do you get official tags? You can purchase your own supply of official 840 RFID tags directly from the approved suppliers. You'll need a premise ID number for these tags. This is the best option if you're a breeder of livestock or have many animals. It's also important if you're going to be going to any shows or exhibitions. If you have a petting zoo, some of those animals will need identification. You can request free noose tags from your farm veterinarian or state animal health officials. These tags are available in limited supplies. This may not be the best way to go if you're tagging an animal for exhibition purposes. These tags may not be accepted. An example is some of the fairs, the animals need the 840 tags. It's also just easier to get the 840s if you're going to do anything, because if you're going to cross state lines, you're going to need that. So you can purchase an animal that already has an official tag and place their farm of origin. This is the best option if you always buy in animals. I think that's it for me. Is there any questions?
Myself.
Go to chat here.
Yeah, does it cost money to get a premise ID?
It does not cost anything to get your number, but once you get your number, you do have to purchase your tags.
Okay. All right, I think we'll keep going, and I'll need to share my screen.
Right, you should be able to do that now.
How's that? Can you see it?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. I'll try again.
Oh, so you should be able to.
Yeah, share screen. I don't know why. Let me do this.
Just
Okay.
at the PowerPoint.
It says share screen.
Are you sharing your desktop?
No, it's not showing me I have choices. There we go. Okay, great. Share. Awesome. Okay.
There you go. We can see it.
Great. All right. So we're going to dive right into what can you do on the farm to be part of contact tracing that we talked about. Now, if you were a human and had, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. If you were human and had COVID-19, you would volunteer this information. But because you as a farmer represent the animals, this is what you have to do. And so this is where, if your animals have official ID, you have a premise and a farm ID, you're ahead of the game in terms of what's happening, where your animals are, and records on them. So record keeping, what information? Well, the number of animals and their IDs in each group, you often group them. So that way, if a certain group is exposed, you know all of them in that group. And it's very useful to have the age and the sex, because as we saw from Carolyn's presentation, PRRS has different, exhibits differently in different ages. For your own records, origin and breeding. Now, origin could be important if you've imported or purchased an animal off the farm. Now, for production records, this is for you as well, but animal weights is useful in any type of animal, how they grow, your size of animals, and why did it leave the farm? That could be an indication of some issues there. So medical records, obviously, treatments received, test results, symptoms, and then if they did die because of that illness, what was the cause determined? Okay, so we wanted to kind of bring it down to the farm level, and what biosecurity measures will help support this contact tracing. So first, and going with the title, you know, you want to nip it in the bud. And how do you do that? Just like with COVID-19, you restrict exposure to it. So who's coming on your farm? What equipment is driving there for harvesting or for deliveries? Are there any livestock nearby? Is there any wildlife nearby? So what you want to do is get a handle on that in some ways. And just like the signs on the highway that say, if you're sick, please stay out of the barn. If you're sick, please stay home. You know, that's what that could indicate. So think of areas, number one, where people are coming on your farm, or you have an exposure risk from other animals that could bring this a disease on your farm. Now, a lot of you, or some of you, might want to show your animals, and you want to limit that. But if that's what you do, then you have to set up a whole protocol of how are you not going to commingle. And there is going to be some exposure when you're showing animals in the ring and everything. And so what are you going to do after? Well, after you try to nip it, if you can't, then you isolate animals, whether you've just purchased an animal, a breeding boar or something, or you've come back from show. So these isolation pens is just what it says. They need to be away from the herd. Ideally, they're in another building, because you don't want to share air or potential of contamination water. And then the minimum recommended days of quarantine, keeping them separate. is 21 days. And you'd have to, depending on the disease. So here's an animal that's definitely isolated. It's solid walls. It's the only animal in the pen, and ideally it's in another building. So the next thing is muck, taking care of things that will spread the disease. So in between animal groups, and when you have new people come on the farm, foot baths, and then after an animal is sick or in quarantine, disinfection of it. And lastly, if, as Ann mentioned, if an animal dies, maybe there's a tissue sample, but the rest of it would need disposal. And there we have really good guidelines with the state on composting animals. And then in general, this is just good management. The lowest stress environment will help keep your animals healthy if they are exposed, and bring them back to health quicker. And I would say water, fresh air, bedding are the kind of the gold standards for keeping your animals healthy. Okay, so to sum it up, how do you prevent? We talked about it. It's just sort of just a different way of presenting it. So if you don't have a plan already, the simplest thing to start with is a premise map. Just you could draw on a piece of paper of your buildings, where the traffic is, and then maybe choose the area where you're going to get the most exposure with people visiting and put a sign up. That could be step one. And where would you need to disinfect if people do come in? Your veterinarian, for example. And then where do you have an isolation area? Then I would just start there. And as we've been harping on, record any animal movements, the dates and locations. And this is because, as we spoke about, we want, the USDA just doesn't want to restrict and control. It wants commerce to happen. So if you have all these records and your animals have been proven to not expose, then you're gold. You can probably continue to sell animals off your farm. Okay, so we talked about individuals, noticing their behavior, having groups of them. So under detection, what are the symptoms and what's the duration? And you have to choose, you're going to write it down by hand or use electronic, just whatever you're comfortable with. So in this example here, we have a herd of pigs on pasture, and you should know, they should have IDs, and you should know how many are in it. So because if someone takes care of them, you want to tell them there's 21 pigs here, they should all be there. In this case, we have a very nice one of those PRRS in terms of the rotund pig right there. And then we notice, say you've gone away for 2 weeks and you had someone taking care of your herd, and you notice this little one. And you're thinking, whoa, what happened? Did that get sick? Well, if you check your records, perhaps that's just the young one, the one with the red arrow. And it's just at the bottom of the heap in terms of competing for food. However, it could also be that it's the same age as the big one with the yellow arrow, and it needs some attention. And then response. Everyone has to respond. So you, on the farm, you separate that animal that's sick or the one you brought in that you just purchased, and isolate it from everyone else. And I suppose if it's in the same barn or attached, perhaps it could be a solid wall in between, and you have to enter from a separate door. And quarantine them for the specific amount of time, at least 3 weeks. All right, there's a sick animal or a quarantined animal, communicate. Let any other person who's taking care of the animals know. Provide them with separate clothing, boots, or a wash area in between. So that's another step you could take. And then discuss it with your veterinarian and have an established veterinarian client-patient relationship so that you could call them and say, hey, I've got a sick animal, and they could perhaps on the phone or with photos determine what to do next and help you with that. All right. So I think, all right, so here's the conclusion and take home, is that contact tracing is virtually the same as animal disease traceability, and probably based on that in many ways. You start with animal ID. So this is why USDA wants animals identified. It's the way to control the disease. And when you buy these tags and put them on, the only time it's tracked is when your animals are moved. Okay, so here's animal identification. This is, I believe it's an RFID tag. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then link this to record keeping. And we're going to give resources at the end for this. So that animal has a history of what's been done to it, any health issues and remarks. Okay, and then continue just so like in the last few slides to build your strength of biosecurity on your farm. What's the first simple thing you can do in each area? And then have that veterinary client-patient relationship. And on our website, we actually have an Excel spreadsheet that lists veterinarians in the state who are licensed who can who treat large animals. So go there. There's your patient-client relationship. Are there any questions?
Excuse me, we did have a question from Facebook, but I think Carolyn has answered it.
I answered it in the chat. I'm not sure if they can see that on Facebook. I'm happy to.
Posted it to Facebook.
Perfect.
But you can, there was a question about electronic tags that are available for swine and if they can be used. And the ones, are there some that don't migrate?
So to that question, for the people that might be listening and not see that on Facebook, my answer was that there actually are not approved implantable microchips for swine. So the USDA ADT program sets kind of the minimum standard regarding what is approved official identification for each species. And then the states can whittle it down from there. And for swine, implantable microchips are not an approved device for individual animal ID.
Well, and she thought that it was only approved for swine. So that is good to know. Interesting, exact opposite. Yes. And so Dawn and I both discussed probably the most common methods of approved ID for swine. There are other options like breed registered ear notching patterns, things like that, but they're much less commonly used and it's a little bit more complicated. So an important thing to note is if any individual producer or swine owner has further questions about this or wants to know more about some of the less commonly used options, they can access those resources that I pointed out. I think it was on the second slide, either by going directly to the USDA website or they can call us and we are happy to have a further discussion about their particular situation. And then of course the follow-up is, so then microchips could be used for other species? Yes. So tune in to the goat webinar and we will expand on that. Okay, so but generally, yes, the person asking has sheep. And so, yep. Yep. And so we'll go into detail about that in our goat lecture, and again, same resource, USDA ADT. It has everything split up by species, so there's a wealth of information there.
Okay. All right, I think we're going to, and here it is. So contact staff at DACF or University of Maine for support if you have questions. Okay, I'm not sure there are any participants today, but we had a poll of what you've learned. So if not, then I guess Donna Coffin, you'll tell me, should I progress since we're hitting the end of the... Oh, go ahead. All right. So we're going to give you a poll and before this. So here are some health resources for pork producers to kind of help you in what we presented today. I know it's kind of a busy slide, but I'll walk you through it in the national state level. Let's see, there, whoops, sorry about that, everyone. There we go. Okay, the USDA funded something called the Secure Pork Supply. That with the pork checkoff, and they help you create your own plan, biosecurity plan if something happens. If there's an outbreak, how do you prevent? How do you get all this, your everything in order. What should you do? And then secondly, just as Carolyn said, official animal identification, just go to the website. We have actually videos on official identification for swine and how to actually put it in the ear. So go there anytime and watch that video and share it. And again, I said we have an Excel spreadsheet at our website that lists large animal vets. And on the right side, farm resources. I found that this website, Biosecurity for, there we go, that's the video. Okay, so biosecurity information and training. There's one website the University of Vermont was funded to create over the years, and it's Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture. They have many examples and training, and they even walk you through doing your own biosecurity plan. So they link to other sites around the world that they vetted or around the country. So that's a great one-stop shop. And then I would say record keeping. Here we've been harping on it. Well, I did research a little bit, and PigChamp is one. It was developed by the University of Minnesota to collect data for the College of Medicine. And now they've turned it into a worldwide software program. And they have basic levels. You can do a mobile app, and that way you could do it right from a tablet or your phone. I haven't gotten the prices yet on that. And then there's Porcitech, and that one has mobile if you like to have your phone with you all the time. And they have a free version that you could do, collect basic data on your computer, and then it starts about $250 per year. So that's kind of nice. So that's a good electronic one. That's very useful. And then if you really want to do it by hand, this is just one book that came up on recording for record keeping. So all this will help you contain the disease and to let officials know the records on your farm to help you continue your business. Okay, so here are the contacts for the Animal Health Division. All right, well, thank you for attending today, and we hope this has been informative and that you feel comfortable contacting us. And it concludes our presentation, and the next one, October 14th, will be on sheep. So enjoy the rest of your day.